President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. claims his administration has achieved a functional government with the best and brightest officials in his first 100 days in office.
And to boost the economy, the Marcos administration is eyeing to borrow $500 million from foreign sources, marking its debut in the international debt market. Arian Kalumbiran with the big story.
The Marcos administration debuts in the international debt market as it seeks to borrow at least $500 million from foreign sources through a dollar-denominated bond offering. The government sold $2 billion with the issuance of bonds with tenors of 5 years and 10.5 years, as well as a 25-year green or sustainability bond. Proceeds of the bonds will be used for budget financing and for climate change and sustainable development efforts. Speaking to Radio 5's Ted Filon and DJ Chacha, Ateneo Economics Professor Alvin Ang says he is confident that the borrowing plan is part of the Finance Department's strategy to further boost economic recovery.
Ngayon kasi ang utang natin karamihan nasa mga 60 to 70% local eh. Pero may mga pagkakataon na kailangan mong umutang sa international sapagkat yun nga, kaya tayo naging credit worthy, mataas yung rating natin. Para yan ay magamit natin kung kailangan.
The Economist adds that it's impossible for the Philippines to default on its foreign debts as its credit rating remains manageable and has enough dollar reserves. This is the second dollar-denominated offering for 2022 and the first under President Marcos. Meanwhile, Marcos claims his administration was able to achieve a, quote, functional government with the best and brightest officials during his first 100 days in office. Speaking before the Manila Overseas Press Club, President Marcos said that 100 days into his 6-year term, he was able to put together a government that is driven to reach economic targets. The president also touted his visits to ASEAN countries like Singapore and Indonesia, saying these allowed him to show the world where the Philippines is headed economically.
We bring the best and the brightest, and we do not look at color in terms of political color. I think we have done that.
To reach economic targets, President Marcos said his government has already started to address supply issues, specifically on sugar and fertilizer, by as early as his first 50 days in office. He says his government is also looking into non-traditional sources of these commodities, like Russia.
Senator Kit just brought up also this foreign policy between Ukraine and Russia, and we take a very balanced view, because the truth of the matter is we may have to deal with Russia for fuel, for fertilizer.
Arian Kalumbiran, We Are One News.
The Philippines' unemployment rate climbed to 5.3% in August. That is equivalent to 2.68 million jobless Filipinos, slightly higher than the 2.6 million recorded in July. This means an additional 78,000 were deemed unemployed in August. 14.7% of the population, that's more than 7 million workers, are meanwhile considered underemployed. These are workers who have expressed desire to have additional work hours or to have an additional job. The August underemployment rate is higher than the 13.8% recorded in July. To talk to us more about the latest economic figures, let's welcome again on the show JC Punongbayan, Assistant Professor at the UP School of Economics. He's joining us via Zoom. Welcome to The Big Story, JC.
Good evening again, Robbie and Gretchen.
We were having this conversation yesterday. Technical problems got in the way. So let's pick up where we left off. I believe you were telling us about your assessment of the first 100 days of the Marcos administration, particularly in its handling of the economy.
Yes, Robbie. So, as you said, the Marcos administration got a bit unlucky in the sense that they came into power in this time when global inflation is on the rise. The probability of a global recession is very high, and supply issues are still not resolved here in the country. But at the same time, the Marcos administration is not helpless to address many of these issues. And the president is actually in a good position to address inflation insofar as food inflation contributes the most to overall inflation. So, for example, the president could have addressed many of the supply issues to boost production in agriculture, maybe to import more, and solve many of the value chain issues that he has been alluding to for the longest time.
Yeah, but in the meantime, JC, I believe the first public surveys are coming out. Generally, good, confident assessments of the president in a lot of fields, but very, very clearly on the handling of inflation, in particular, relatively lower scores there from in terms of public confidence. In the meantime, despite everything that you said that they could still do, no less than the Department of Agriculture is flagging probably another at least 20% rise in the price of rice in the coming months. What are the headwinds there for the rest of the quarter and in the coming year on how they can arrest food inflation and inflation in general?
Well, actually, Pulse Asia came out with a survey today showing that 2 out of 3 adult Filipinos see controlling inflation as the top concern. And actually, this is the only issue wherein the president actually got a negative net rating. I mean, this is really sticking out as a main problem of the administration. And as you mentioned, there's a looming rice shortage by the end of this year. And for sure, that will only fuel inflation in the coming months. For its part, the Bangko Sentral has been doing its part. It has been raising interest rates in a bid to reduce demand and abate inflation. But the supply issues need to be addressed as well. And as I said, the Department of Agriculture as well as the other agencies are in a good position to address these, but they need to do more.
Let's take a look at the unemployment and underemployment rates higher in August compared to July. And that's given the high inflation rates, higher costs of living. People want to seek for more jobs to augment their incomes. And given that the president has said that he has gotten the best and brightest in government, now do you see a solid economic or post-pandemic recovery plan being formed as of the moment?
Gretchen, we're actually poised to go back to 2019 levels of production very soon. But the bigger problem is going back to the pre-pandemic trajectory of GDP. And actually, the NEDA foresaw in the previous administration that it will take about a decade to get back to that pre-pandemic trajectory. So even if the Marcos administration is able to meet its most optimistic growth targets, actually it will take until 2034 for the Philippine economy to get back to its pre-pandemic trajectory. So this only shows that the economic scars from the pandemic are really quite deep, and this is a major concern that the Marcos administration will have to grapple with in the coming years.
And speaking of those scars are not only deep, they are also global in nature. Being global, of course, having an implication on 2 key pillars for our economy, OFWs, BPOs. What do you see in those sectors, given that they are also very dependent on how the rest of the world recovers?
Yes, many people are saying that actually they are beneficiaries of the weak peso. For example, OFWs are able to remit more pesos to their loved ones because of the weakening peso and the stronger dollar. But that is actually counteracted by the high inflation rate here domestically. So when prices are rising at a very fast pace, 6.9% based on the most recent data, that will actually eat away at the purported benefits of a weaker peso. And it is actually a concern of the government that they will have to deal with the dwindling supply of dollars in the country, especially as capital flees to other countries, especially the US, where it's more favorable to invest. And we can expect that the peso will actually continue to weaken for as long as the interest rates in the US continue to be going up in the coming months.
Given that we are subject to many factors that are beyond our control, is there anything that government can do, given the forecast, higher prices, inflation, also higher underemployment, unemployment rates? What can we do?
Actually, Gretchen, there's a bit of good news in the labor statistics that came out today, in the sense that the labor force participation rate is at its highest level since the pandemic started. This only goes to show that with the reopening of the economy, more and more Filipinos are actually seeking work. And that's good news. That only tells us that the economy is somehow recovering in that sense. But when it comes to inflation, for example, the Department of Agriculture can provide more support for farmers, especially in buying fertilizers, which have already gone up in price. Actually, their prices have actually tripled in the past months. Many farmers have actually scaled production, and this might have repercussions in the coming months when it comes to agricultural supply. Importation as well could be a strategy, but as we saw in the sugar importation fiasco, the current administration is quite hesitant to import because of their commitment, their promise to pursue food sovereignty, meaning greater reliance on domestic production. But they will have to import more if they want to avoid drastic shortages of agricultural commodities in the coming months.
All right, maraming salamat, JC Punongbayan, Assistant Professor at the UP School of Economics.